This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a soul-led leadership coach to women in midlife who are wanting more meaning in the second half. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 135. Do you have a loud inner critic? You know, that voice inside your head that is nonstop and beats you up because you mess up or things aren't perfect or tells you not to assert yourself and ask for what you need? I know many highly sensitive professional women struggle with this, but if you head over to today's show notes, you can download your own guide in turning your inner critic into your inner guide in 4 steps. Well, welcome, sisters. If this is the first time that you are tuning into the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, I want to say welcome. And for those of you who are my regular subscribers, I want to say thank you for you as well. As many of you know, I took the month of March off, which was really needed. My businesses were really becoming busy, and I actually just needed a little break from all of this, from getting the guests and reading the books and, coming up with the questions, all the things that happen behind the scenes for this podcast. I also want to give you a heads up. For those of you who listen to my podcast on my website, where you go to the show notes and you get more information about my guests and their books and different things like that, you will see some changes coming up. So, I've gone through various evolutions of what it looks like in my coaching business, just like so many of my guests. It's so fun to watch all these women I've interviewed evolve and shift and change over the years. And this is so much of what I, share with all of you. And when I talk with my guests, it's giving yourself permission to just keep evolving and changing and going towards those things that really do light you up, things that make you feel more fulfilled and all of that. So on my website, you're going to see me do some shifting away from working mostly with highly sensitive entrepreneurs. I know I will still attract so many of you because I am one, and I love talking with others who are highly sensitive. But I'm finding some of my clients, right, they're not entrepreneurs. They are in corporate America. And I have a background in that as well. So I can identify with some of their stuck points and things that they are wanting to shift and change. And so what I've gone back to, it's funny, I've kind of done this full revolution of going back to kind of the roots, where I want to keep things where I'm talking about spirituality. So in the podcast, you're still going to hear stuff about spirituality, mindset, soul work. You're going to hear about self-care. You're going to probably hear about some business stuff and managing, life in general regarding professional, your professional place. But on my website, you're going to hear me talk more about finding meaning in the second half of life as a woman who is in midlife. And for me, that meaning is going to be, MEANING. Because so often what I'm seeing is, we go from that first half of life living where there's the obligations, we're growing, we're getting our ego strength, but then we can get stuck in those obligations and, raising children and doing this kind of job. And yet our soul continues to call to us. It is there all the time. And when we ignore that, we then create fears, we create worries, we create disconnection, we create depression. All kinds of stuff can get created when we're really not listening to that inner wisdom or the soul. And so I'm going to be talking more about that on my website and going forward. I'm in the process of creating a group program as well, because I know some of you don't want to necessarily do one-on-one. And I know groups can be extremely powerful. I've had a couple guests where we've talked about group work and how incredibly powerful that can be. And I know for myself, when I work in groups, there's just so much shifting and changing that can happen. And there's just a whole different vibe that happens. So just want to give you a heads up. There are some changes to come on the website. There's going to be a little bit of changing regarding podcasting, but not a ton. And we're going to go from there. All right. Now on today's episode, I shared a post on Facebook back in February from a woman named Maria, and she's a licensed marriage and family therapist, but she's also she calls herself a relationship expert. And she's in the health and wellness field. And this post really got traction on my Facebook page. And it's called Things I Am No Longer Apologizing For. And the graphic, I just loved it because it just spoke so much about things that, again, that talked about on this podcast of women get into this mindset. And again, I think there's a lot of cultural stuff that is put on people, and we live inside these constraints. And it's really busting through that, whether it's you going after being financially well off, whether that's you taking a break and doing the self-care so that you can really serve your clients that you work with in your business or serve your family, but also not forget you. So this graphic really went, I call it viral because it was viewed over like 16,000 times, shared over, I think 150 sometimes, which is not typical for my small little Facebook page. But anyways, I wanted to go back and just address this on the podcast. And so that I'm going to link some episodes in the show notes where if you want to find a little bit more about really stepping into this, no more apologizing for the things you do, for who you are, then you'll have some resources to go back to. So some of these little things that she had on her graphic was, I'm no longer apologizing for eating dessert, right? Very simple, but it's true. It's like, why would I apologize for that anymore? I'm no longer going to apologize for my voice, my truth. No longer going to apologize for joy. No longer going to apologize for changing or outgrowing spaces, or my sexuality, or my fantasies. No longer going to apologize for not looking, quote, put together. I don't know how often I've heard women like, I've got to put on my makeup or good clothes when I go out to the grocery store, or when I go shopping, I've got to look like I've got it all together. And get curious with that. It's like, because why? What am I worried about? What am I concerned about if I don't look, quote, put together? More of these things that she has on this graphic is, I'm no longer going to apologize for taking a stance against injustice. I know so many of you listening, some of you are in the forefronts of various causes that mean something to you, that impact you directly, and others of you are behind the scenes, and that's all beautiful. It isn't apologizing for what you stand for. It's going after those things, because everything that we do, whether it's big or small, does make an impact. And it's not apologizing for, again, those things that line up with your value system, that line up with your belief system. Another thing is like, I'm no longer apologizing for a messy lived-in home. I had to laugh at that one because I cannot tell you, I'm just like, man, does that bring up memories. I know as a kid, if we went away or if people dropped by, which was not too often because we lived out in the country, but that worry about what people were going to think if we didn't have all the dishes done, or if we didn't have the newspapers put away, or if we didn't have our toys put away. There was such a concern about how people might view us as a family, and that we're not clean or we're not, quote, together. And it's really recognizing, like, you know what? And I know there's today, if people drop by, I don't particularly like people just to drop by, because that's more about just messes with my kind of own equilibrium on certain things. But there's still that little voice in my head like, oh my gosh, they're going to see the stacks of paper you have everywhere. They're going to see that you didn't do your dishes that day, whatever. And it's just recognizing, so what? And if they think I'm messy, so what? Right? The world isn't going to end. And if they end our relationship because of that, okay, it's going to stink, but whatever, move on, right? Another thing is, I'm not going to apologize for asking questions or being curious. I know in so many of my episodes, I encourage people to be curious. I encourage my clients to get curious. We can't grow or shift or change or even gain understanding of one another's belief systems or vantage points unless we are curious. Without curiosity, it really creates that division, us versus them mentality. It's all black, it's all white. There's no gray in between. There's no room for compromise. There's no room for us to agree to disagree in a healthy way. So it's okay to ask questions. It's encouraged to ask questions. It's encouraged to be curious. Another thing she has in here is, I'm not going to apologize for distancing myself from inauthentic relationships. I talked about in one of my episodes, which I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but it's about, having girlfriends or having relationships that are healthy. There are many of them, which I can give you. I've talked to so many different women, Amanda Hildebrandt, Dr. Terry Mack. Again, they're going to be in the show notes about what it means to have healthy, intimate relationships, dating relationships, things like that. It's okay if the pandemic hasn't taught people anything, you're going to find out who's a friend and who's not, and who may be healthy and who is not. And if it no longer works for you, sometimes we really do outgrow those relationships we've had in our life, and that's okay. It's okay not to be in those toxic relationships anymore. It's okay not to be in the inauthentic relationships anymore. You've got so much time on this planet. And when we live more consciously, when we live more authentically, you really don't need to keep giving space or time or energy to those relationships that also don't feed you. Relationships are about that give and take. It doesn't mean it's always equal or balanced, but there's a give and take in having the dialogue and growing and things like that. All right, another thing that she put in this graphic, which again I loved, is I'm no longer going to apologize about my limits or my boundaries. And way back when, this is back episode 12, so this is a couple years ago, I had a conversation with Sharon Martin on boundaries. And I know she's in the midst of, I think, rewriting a boundaries book, that we know our boundaries and limits can change, again, as we evolve as humans. Things of our boundaries, what we used to stand for may shift or change, and that's okay. If you are in that people-pleasing mode or you're in that perfectionism mode and you are getting walked all over, it may mean you've got to set some boundaries. Again, nobody's a mind reader. They can't do what you want them to do unless you state it out loud. And no, they're not always going to like what it is you're setting a limit on, and that's okay. You're not responsible for other people's emotions or their behaviors. You are responsible to them. Again, different. That's a distinction. You're not responsible for others. You're responsible to them. And so you're helping truly teach people how to treat you, whether you have boundaries or you don't. Another thing which I absolutely love is no longer apologizing and investing in yourself or having financial goals or, wanting to do more, make more of a difference financially or having that financial wealth. I've talked about that so many different times, and Tamara and I talked about that in some of our episodes. I did a whole series on money mindset back. It was episodes 34 through 36. And I know I interviewed Joan Sotkin during, I think that was episode 35, where we talked about, finances. So again, it's somehow women were not supposed to really, talk about money, or it makes you greedy if you want to make more. It's like, no, you're providing for yourself. You're providing for your family. Own it. It's all good. We don't need to stay in poverty. And when we make more, we're able to serve on a different level too, being able to give back in a different way so that we can truly have, people can have meals, right? And we can make a difference in different organizations to help other women, other families get out of poverty. So I think it's owning that and no longer apologizing for it. Oh, one of the other things she had on this graphic was no longer apologizing for resting or being, quote, unproductive. I think this is huge. So if you remember in episodes when I was talking about perfectionism, which was, I think, 73 to 75, so much of perfectionism is that fear of just not doing anything, right? Fearing the perception from others that you're going to be lazy or you're unproductive. And we need to be unproductive at times so that our creative skills will be, kind of come back to the forefront. Our problem solving skills can come back to the forefront. If we don't ever take breaks, that's what leads to burnout. That's what leads to the exhaustion. And I know in episode 19, episode 28, talked quite a bit about self-care, and this is all part of it. Being is okay. We don't need to be doing all the time. Again, that doing is more of that masculine energy and being is more of the feminine energy. And so having a balance between those two is what is needed. We cannot be hustling and pushing all the time. And I know for the highly sensitives that I do work with, it really doesn't work. It literally does lead to, your nervous system gets overwhelmed and exhausted, and it is not sustainable. She has a couple other things in here. One, I'm no longer going to apologize for honoring my needs or my expectations. I'm not apologizing for being assertive. And again, it's like these basic things, but they're really, really powerful. It brings all of these things to the forefront and looking at what am I not living consciously? What am I letting I'm just kind of being asleep in a trance, right, in my life? But when I'm really conscious of, I'm not apologizing for these things, you're truly living more intentionally. One of the other things in here, and again, this to me goes back to first half of life living to second half of life living, is I'm no longer apologizing for challenging family rules. Now, that could be your family of origin. That could be your own internal family that you're in now. But being able to say, this is working or this is not working, or here's what I would like to have shifted or changed, talking about it. If there is, oppression going on in the family, it's being able to say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And again, for your family of origin, they've got their own fears and things going on. And so they can project those onto you. And it doesn't mean you got to take it on. It's like they've got their path, you have your path. Another one she has is, I'm no longer apologizing for wanting more. I loved that. So instead of, most women that I'm working with, right, it's like that staying small. And I get it. It's like, oh, it's easy to hide behind the scenes, not put myself out there, not to do a podcast, not to do videos, whatever. That's easy, but I play small and then I reach fewer people. And it's being able to say, it's okay to want more. It's okay to not apologize for wanting more. So I'm going to invite you, this is quote my challenge to you that I say often with my clients. I'm going to invite you, explore in your life, where are you often apologizing? Again, it's really common for women to apologize that they're financially well off. They apologize for not wearing a lipstick when they went out or something. They apologize for their house looking messy. They apologize for saying, I just want to take today off and rest. So where in your life are you apologizing? And what's one step you can take today to no longer apologize for that? Maybe that's, I'm no longer going to apologize that I'm going to go to bed because I'm exhausted and there's still dishes on the, countertop. And so if somebody says, Mom, what happened? You didn't do the dishes. Or a friend comes over and like, oh, I see your dishes. You're like, yep, I was exhausted and I listened to my body and I went to bed instead. So where can you begin to challenge that belief system, step in and be assertive for yourself? Or just say, it's like, yep, they are there, and no longer apologize for that. I hope you found this helpful and that you, again, find one area in your life, if not more, and no longer apologize, because this is you taking your power back, being more empowered as a woman. And remember, if you have children, I don't care what their age is, you're role modeling to both your sons, your daughters, that it is okay not to apologize for some of these things. It breaks those old cultural systems, those constructs that don't work. All right, my dears, I will talk to you next time. Take care. Thank you for listening. And remember, if you have a loud inner critic, one that tells you you're not enough or you can't do something, head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com and download your Turn your inner critic into your inner guide in 4 steps.